Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to one of today's most anticipated sessions, a fireside chat titled Learning from the Pioneers, How Kuwait Initiated a Chemical Industry Revolution in the Region. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel. Shaikh Nawaf Al-Sabah, Deputy Chairman and CEO of Kuwait Petroleum Corporation, will share thought-provoking insights from the industry's incredible journey. In a special panel moderated by Paula Naoufal, Senior Reporter at CNN Business Arabic. Together, they will delve into the lessons learned from the past that continue to shape the future. Please join me in welcoming Shaikh Nawaf Al-Sabah and Paula Naoufal to the stage.
Good morning, everyone, and it's going to be a fruitful day, I believe. We're starting off the day with a great speech from the chairman of OFQ, and now we're having a lively and engaging session with Shaikh Nawaf. So I want to start off by saying, usually when we think of energy, traditional energy, we think of oil and gas, we think of fueling planes, fueling cars, so that's where our head goes to directly. But beyond energy, petrochemicals are the invisible backbone of modern life. When we think of medical equipments that save lives every day, when we think of plastic, even when we look at the iPhone, it has also petrochemicals in it. Not only that, from agriculture to healthcare, renewable energy, and cutting-edge technology. Petrochemicals are playing and will continue to play a fundamental role in modern life. And Kuwait is a regional player and also a global player when it comes to petrochemicals. And today, with Shaikh Nawaf, we're going to be discussing Kuwait's role when it comes to the petrochemical industry and the broader energy sector. Thank you so much for being today with us.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Paula. And it's fantastic to be in the Sultanate of Oman, a sultanate that is known for its hospitality all through the Gulf and continues to prove that yet again. And certainly for GPCA to be hosting it for the first time here is very good for GPCA, but also because OQ has done a great job in hosting this. So thank you to all of them.
Also, I want to remind the audience that I believe there's a QR code somewhere behind me, so you can send in your questions whenever you want to ask Shaikh Nawaf something, and we can play them out throughout the conversation. But Shaikh Nawaf, I want to start by asking you, when we talk about Kuwait's Vision 2040, how important are petrochemicals and the industry of petrochemicals when we look at the broader vision?
Sure. I'll take a step back perhaps and explain our vision to 2040 and how petrochemicals obviously fit in with that. But to understand that, I have to put it into context with the broader energy demand. We look at the energy mix right now. It's something around 620 exajoules of energy demand worldwide. About a third of that is satisfied by oil right now. As the energy transition continues into the future, we're looking at placement of hydrocarbons within that energy mix. And we anticipate between now and 2040 and 2050 really, that the energy demand, worldwide energy demand will increase by about 50%. That increase is going to be fueled by, one, population growth, and also populations around the world moving out of poverty. The poverty rate in the world has been declining consistently over the past couple of decades and will continue to decline into the future. So that means there's more demand. So how will we satisfy that demand? When we look at worldwide energy demand right now, as I said, it's going to be, we anticipate it's going to increase about 50%. A lot of that extra will be taken up by renewables, by additional sources of energy. But when you look at all of the various forms of energy worldwide, you will find that even if I take all of the renewables, I take nuclear, I take even coal, you still have about a quarter of that larger energy pie in 2040 and 2050 that's going to be not satisfied by anything other than oil. So that's where we are investing at KPC, understanding that energy demand will increase, oil demand will remain more or less constant to where it is right now. We're about 100 million barrels of oil demand a day. Give or take, we anticipate we'll be there by 2040 as well. To maintain that production capacity requires a lot of investment. And that's where I'm getting to, ultimately, to where we're going, is that investment requires us to bring on new production capacity in Kuwait, in the rest of the Gulf. That's where the resources lie. Now, moving that downstream into the petrochemicals market, by the very same token, and we heard this yesterday, that petrochemical demand will be increasing. We hear a lot about peak demand in oil having come around recently. I still don't believe that. I believe that there's plenty of oil demand, but nobody's actually talked about a peak petrochemical demand. Yes, there's more recycling in plastics. There are some alternatives. You're not seeing as many plastic bottles for PET. You're seeing more glass bottles. True, but petrochemicals, plastics remain essential to modern day life. They, almost everything the surgeon touches in a hospital operating room has some connection to the petrochemicals industry. And that is predominantly a hydrocarbons-based industry. So we are producing oil and gas to satisfy a feedstock that goes into petrochemicals, and then petrochemicals will be a focus of investment for us into the future. So when I'm talking about petchem demand being consistent and increasing over time, we will triple our petrochemicals production capacity in that period to 2040, because we are confident that the demand for hydrocarbons and petrochemicals will remain strong into that period.
Shaikh Nawaf, I want to take a step back, and I wanted to ask you these questions later on in the session, but you touched upon them, and I believe they're very crucial. So you spoke about production capacity. Kuwait, its target is 3.2 million barrels per day by 2024 and 4 million barrels per day by 2035. Could you provide an update on the progress towards these milestones and targets? Are you on track for 2025?
Yes, we're absolutely on track for 2025. By 2035, we plan to reach 4 million barrels of production capacity a day. Now, capacity obviously is different than actual production. As you know, there's an OPEC plus curtailment on production right now, and we're abiding by that. So that puts our OPEC allocation right now at 2.413 million barrels a day. But our production capacity is much higher than that at this point. And it's that spare capacity that puts the Gulf producers especially in a position where we are partners for our customers around the world, so that we can provide that additional capacity as and when the economies of the world need it, or if there are supply constraints or shocks to supply coming anywhere around the world. We have that traditional capacity to bring onto the market. So we're on target for our production increases, and we are confident that the demand is going to be there.
And when we speak about also investments, so KPC has announced a $33 billion investment to enhance production capacity over the 5 next years.
Yeah.
In light of the global underinvestment trends in the oil and gas sector, which a lot of states, OPEC plus member states, are calling for investments in this sector, do you consider these funds sufficient to achieve your targets?
Yeah, we've looked at it very carefully. What we need to get to our production figures. We have a tremendously large God-given resource base, and we intend to exploit it for the benefit of the nation and also for the communities where we operate. As you know, KPC operates around the world. through various of our subsidiaries. The allocation that we've put in funds is essentially starts off with what do we need to get to 3.2 and then ultimately to 4 million by 2035. But at least to the 3.2 and maintain it over the next 5-year period. We've looked at the drilling that we need to do, and as you know, we have been producing oil for more than 8 decades. A lot of that oil was produced under what are usually called easy oil terms. Essentially, that because of the strong underground aquifer under, for example, the Burgan field, the second largest in the world, all we needed to do was drill a well and have the oil extracted. Oil essentially would come out by itself due to the underground pressure. That's why, if you remember, in 1991, when the Iraqis torched over 700 wells in Kuwait, those wells kept burning for months and would have continued to burn probably until today had we not put those fires out. It's because of the underground pressure. Now, as fields begin to age, they will require more resources, essentially, to produce. We, in Lahmidi, for example, you could get a barrel of oil, you used to be able to get a barrel of oil from underground all the way down to essentially the loading dock at a ship without ever encountering a single pump. It's because the underground pressure is strong enough to extract the oil from underground. And then Al-Ahmadi is situated topographically just in a beautiful natural decline in height, going down to the tank farms, then ultimately to the export facilities without the need for pumps. Now, after 8 decades of production, the reservoirs need help in terms of production. So we are using enhanced oil recovery techniques, and that's going to require whether it's electric submersible pumps, ESPs, or gas lift, injection of gas to aid in the production. That obviously all requires energy and it requires cost. So we are blessed to have the lowest cost oil barrel in the world. It costs us less than $10 a barrel to produce. And then we also have the lowest carbon cost barrel in the world because there's very little associated energy that's required to extract a barrel of Kuwaiti crude. Now that's going to change over time, obviously, and the allocation that we said at about $9 to $10 billion per year over the next few years is going to be, it's specifically addressing the production capacity, maintaining the cost at a cheap cost, and then also maintaining the low carbon intensity.
Shaikh Nawaf, when we go back to petrochemicals, the GCC countries always talk about diversifying their economies. How does petrochemical play into that diversification pool, let's call it?
Absolutely. Look, we recognize that KPC, for example, whenever we go through our strategy review every few years, I get the same question and have the same debate with my colleagues. Should we be an energy company as opposed to a petroleum company? I remind people that the name on the door says Kuwait Petroleum Corporation and not Kuwait Energy Corporation, and that we have a single shareholder, that's the state of Kuwait, and our shareholder has mandated that we produce, we maximize the value of the hydrocarbons reserve. Now, if our shareholder wanted us to become an energy company, they wouldn't staff half the company with petroleum engineers. They would bring in people with more expertise in solar power generation, whatnot. That being said, though, we recognize that we have to branch out. Now, petrochemicals has always been a natural downstream step for us to take. That's why at PIC, established in 1963, was it had the first petrochemical plant in the Gulf. It's now and it's continued to grow over the last few decades, and now we love to see all of our Gulf brethren have a similar and larger petrochemical presences around the world, and that's a boost to all of us together. It's a natural diversification because for a certain period of time, by the way, putting the upstream business aside at KPC, but from the downstream businesses and everything else, the biggest cash generator had been petrochemicals. Now, obviously, we're in a different commodities market right now, with petrochemical prices being depressed and seem to be continuing in that way for a more extended period of time than a normal business cycle. But cash generation, PIC was generating the most cash of all of our subsidiaries. We anticipate that's going to continue, and that's why we want to double down on that. And we see tremendous opportunities for growth once the oversupply clears out over the next few years.
And you spoke about the growth of this industry. Specifically at KPC, how will it look like? Will it be through organic growth, acquisition, vertical integration? So how will it look like?
The answer is yes. It'll be all of those. We have, I'm just taking the petrochemical business to one side. We have a great partnership existing in Kuwait under Equate. We, by the way, like names that have these little twists on them. As you know, Equate is a play on the name Kuwait, but obviously is also bringing in the equal partnership that we have between PIC and Dow Chemical, now with also the Kuwaiti private sector involved. We also have, as you may know, a very large downstream business, mostly in Europe, with about 5,000 service stations under the brand name Kuwait, which also is another play on the name Kuwait. So some marketing person has gotten a lot of money just coming up with these names. But we believe in the partnerships. We believe in growing through partnerships. So Equate has built a strong position and a market-leading position in their business. We anticipate that we will grow further organically in Kuwait. We've now in a position to have allocated enough gas for a potential fourth olefins train in Kuwait. We're still studying the feasibility of that. We're not ready to announce anything yet, but we now are confident that we have the gas available to expand even further organically in Kuwait. Second, we think that in this market, it favors the bold. You can't wait for petrochemical prices and markets to recover before you make an acquisition, because then the acquisition price obviously goes up. But we believe that this is a market where we can find good opportunities for inorganic growth. That's through acquisition. And we're looking at various opportunities around the world and places where we think that there's good growth and a good synergy with our business. What we're doing differently now than we had in the past is that we're actually creating more synergy between the petrochemical business that we have and the rest of our businesses. So places where we can take our naphtha and crack it, places where we can use our feedstock position not as independently, but really integrated with the petrochemical business.
And speaking about Kuwait's Vision 2040, I want to take a question on the screen. It's what role does the private sector play when we speak about the vision, specifically within the petrochemical industry?
Absolutely. Well, I'll start off with the petrochemical industry, but also just generally and broadly. I mentioned Equate. Equate started off as a 50-50 JV between PIC and what was then Union Carbide now Dow Chemical. And it's been a fantastic partnership. We've really been able to grow. It's actually the largest foreign investment in Kuwait and one of the largest non-oil exporters out of Kuwait. The partnership is strong because there's a lot of mutual respect, but then also an understanding that this is part of a larger Kuwaiti community investment. So that's why we took down our investments. We in Dow Chemical took down our investments to 42.5% each now, and the remaining 15% was subsequently IPO'd into two IPOs into the Kuwaiti market to allow Kuwaiti private citizens to be part of that growth in petrochemicals. Tremendous demand on those shares. And that's really been part of the community and social interaction that we have in Kuwait. We also recognize that's also a very strong vehicle for growth. There's a lot of capital that wants to invest in this business. So as this business expands, and certainly when we start looking at potentially a new olefins train or what have you, further large investments in that business, we're going to rely on the private sector. We're going to rely on the potential equity that would bring. That's from one side. On the private sector as well in Kuwait, on a broader range, we are now incubating an industrial park in Kuwait, working on putting that together, sort of an industrial valley, if you will. It's a very flat country, though, but we'll find a different name for it. Which will build out businesses that complement our nascent, our oil business. So obviously, constitutionally in Kuwait, the hydrocarbons are owned by the state. So there's not going to be any investment in the hydrocarbons. However, we're looking for further investment in the services sector and in the manufacturing sector for manufacturing, whether it's pipes or valves or the various other things that the business needs on a daily basis. Instead of importing these, we're looking to build out a domestic business. And to that end, the government in Kuwait has been instrumental in helping move this along through the Kuwait Direct Investment Public Authority, KDIPA it's called, which is the Foreign Investor Bureau in Kuwait to bring in foreign investment along with domestic local investment to build out this valley, if you will.
Apart from economic diversification, the other buzzword, let's call it, is the global energy transition.
Yep.
Climate change, and we just also, COP29 just ended a few weeks ago. So I wanted to ask you, when we speak about the broader oil and gas industry and also the petrochemicals industry, how does KPC's strategy align with this global energy transition in both in the oil and gas sector and for the petrochemicals? Sure,
I touched maybe on this going rather quickly at the beginning. Perhaps I'll explain a little bit further. We are absolutely confident that oil demand will remain strong over the next few decades. I mentioned that we're about 100 million barrels a day right now. We anticipate to still be that to satisfy the energy demand that is going to be around in 2040 and 2050. If you look at decline rates right now of oil fields, typically around the world, there's somewhere around 5, maybe 6% per year of production capacity declines naturally just through normal depletion. It's less than that, significantly less than that in the GCC countries, just because of the investment that we make in our fields. So our decline rates are still much better than they are around the world. But if you average everything out over on a worldwide basis, you end up with about a 3% decline rate in production capacity worldwide. Let me put that into context. It's a very simple math equation. 3% of 100 million barrels a day is 3 million barrels every single year. That's more than the production of Kuwait right now. So every year, the oil industry has to bring on new production capacity that exceeds the state of Kuwait. Every single year. That's a tremendous amount of investment. And that's why we believe that even if energy demand, or if oil demand does not increase, even if it remains flat at 100 million barrels a day, which is what even the most pessimistic predictions might be over time, there's going to be a lot of work needed just to satisfy that 100 million.
So whether you're Team IEA or Team OPEC Plus, it's still the same?
OPEC, I think, anticipates an increase in demand over time. I'm just taking a flat. And I think the difference is the difference I have with the IEA projections is that the IEA has said that they called for no new oil investment. And that is a recipe really for disaster on a worldwide basis. The energy transition, it's not a switch, it's a transition. It takes time to develop. If you stop investment immediately right now in hydrocarbons production, you're going to get that demand, you're going to get that depletion going on, and you will not be able to satisfy immediate demand over time. It is a huge gamble to take with humanity because, as I said, modern day life requires oil and gas. And we're not talking about transportation alone. Food packaging. You know, there's a conference right next door here on, I think it's called Agro Oman or something like that. Obviously about agriculture and food. All of that relies on what we produce right here. And the plastics and the packaging. None of the food that can be delivered anywhere around the world, especially in the global south, especially in places that need to import food, none of that can be delivered without the packaging that is produced by the members of GPCA. And that is because this is that's how the economy works. The same thing, medicines can't be delivered anywhere around the world because the suspension agent for the COVID vaccines that we all took, it's glycol. And all of that requires this business. So the energy transition will take time. I think the investments that we have to make will be large. The burden on all of us, though, is to decarbonize our production. So I mentioned that we have the lowest carbon intensity barrel in the world. You know, we're somewhere around 5 kilograms per barrel of carbon emissions, Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. I remember I was at a conference a year ago in one of the international oil companies, American international oil companies, Chevron actually. Mike Wirth was on stage talking about his Permian production and saying that, and how proud he was that it was he reduced the carbon intensity to about 15 kilograms per barrel coming out of the Permian, and that's admirable for what they've done. I came on the panel right after him, and I said, yeah, but we're about a third of that. And we intend to take it to zero very quickly. So the burden on all of us, and that's where the partnerships really come in, is to decarbonize the barrels of production, and that is another round of sort of investments and partnerships that we have to work on together.
Also, when we speak about decarbonizing industry, a lot of technology comes into play. So we've heard about carbon capturing technologies and different aspects of technology. How important are technologies at KPC when we speak about decarbonizing the industry?
Absolutely. There's you know, the old the adage of no man is an island. It applies in so many different ways. Here it applies in a even more important way. I'm looking at, you know, for example, I was born in 1971, so I checked the Merriam-Webster dictionary. They have a great site that just says what are the new words that entered the dictionary, their dictionary, in 1971. A whole bunch of words, but a number of phrases stood out at me. Carbon capture came in as a buzzword in 1971. Solar farms, a few other words. How long has that been since then? 53 years later, and we're still trying to perfect that technology. Carbon capture is nowhere near where it should be, and that's where it requires a lot of investment and a lot of partnership. We started a CCUS pilot project in Kuwait. We partnered with Shell. We found that we have that injecting CO2 into the reservoir to stimulate production was more efficient than use of gas, and plus it frees up the gas for petrochemicals and power generation and other needs. The CO2, the miscibility was fantastic. The problem with the CO2 was in CCUS is that it comes back up with the oil production. And when it does, CO2 has a highly corrosive effect on the metallurgy, on the facilities. So we spent billions of dollars building facilities over the last few decades that would last for decades more, but never with the concept that they were going to handle so much CO2. So handling CO2 and the corrosion effect that it has on these multi-billion-dollar facilities is one of the major challenges. We're working with institutions around the world, whether they're service companies, international oil companies, or even research institutions such as universities and others, to come up with the technology, whether it's lining or retrofitting, that would allow us to continue to use these facilities with the CO2 that comes back up. That is one of the biggest hurdles, I think, that we have. If we can solve that CCUS issue, make it economic to continue to deploy, that takes us a long way towards reaching our net zero target, which is net zero by 2050. I looked at, in a do-nothing case, how much our CO2 emissions, Scope 1 and Scope 2, would be at 2050 if we did nothing of our energy transition plans. And then I started taking step by step. What's the biggest chunk that takes off? CCUS takes out over 45% of our CO2 emissions at 2050 if we deploy that on a large-scale basis, and that's what we're working on. A second one, part of the investment, and that's where the partnerships really come in. A second one is solar power generation. Right now we use in Kuwait, at KPC, throughout our system, we use just under 2 gigawatt hours of electricity. The country is about 17 gigawatts, so we're about 10% or so of the country's electricity usage. We have a plan to roll out solar power generation at KPC, not to power the grid and become an energy company as opposed to a petroleum company, but just to take ourselves as much as we can off the national grid, which, as you know, is mostly a hydrocarbons-based grid. So if we're able to take ourselves off the grid on a net basis, that will take our Scope 2 emissions down essentially to zero. And our plan is to build out the 2 gigawatt hours of solar power within the next few years. That also requires capital and requires partnerships. So one of the things we're looking at right now is, instead of building this out ourselves, is bringing in investors to essentially have an independent power purchase agreement where we buy solar power from them. And interestingly enough, the cost is actually quite impressive, because we think we can actually buy that solar power from the independent power producer that we would bring in at a cost lower than what we're buying electricity from the Ministry of Electricity and Water in Kuwait. So it's a win-win for everybody.
You spoke about the importance of partnerships.
Yes.
So what are the key factors that make these partnerships successful from KPC's experience?
It's important to have really, the most important one is honestly trust. And that's what we think differentiates us in the Gulf than in many other places. And that's because we're used to partnerships. Certain places in the Gulf, especially here, our hosts in Oman and also in Kuwait, we were seafaring people before we discovered any hydrocarbons on our lands. Kuwait was a pearl trading port and a shipbuilding port. We were trading with India, with East Africa, made it all the way to China on wooden dhows. All of that required us to create partnerships and to create the abilities to really become good suppliers and business partners with our customers around the world. So the partnership isn't just in investing, the partnership is also in having a strong relationship with your customers. So we know how to do that. We've done it for generations before we discovered oil, and we've transferred that knowledge down through the generations. So building that trust, building the flexibility. For example, at KPC, we're proud to have customers who have been with us for decades, well before, I mentioned when I was born, well before I was born. We've had customer relationships that extended decades into the past, and we anticipate they'll continue into the future. It's because we grow with our customers. I mentioned Kuwait, for example, as a partnership in Kuwait. It started off as a single plant, and we have grown our production with Kuwait's production capabilities. And that's having the shared vision, having that trust that we can build, and recognizing that in even a supplier-consumer relationship, it's not a transactional relationship. I never refer to it as a transactional relationship, and I never refer to the companies with which we have these relationships as customers. I always call them business partners, because as these companies will build refineries that are tailored to Kuwaiti crude, for example. As they expand them, we will expand our production, and we grow together.
Back on the topic of, there was a question about technologies. I don't know where it went. Can we have it back again? Thank you. So in the meantime, you spoke about the partnerships here in the region. Are we looking towards more partnerships soon?
We're always looking towards partnerships, and I think the partnerships that start in the region, GPIC is a great one. That is one. I always wondered why we don't have more of those. So what we've done is we've done it ourselves, and we, along with our brethren in the Sultanate of Oman, made the largest cross-GCC investment to date, and that is the OQ8 refinery in Duqm. It is a world-class merchant refinery at 230,000 barrels of oil refining capacity a day, and it is a great lodestar for how to build a successful partnership within the GCC. We would like to expand that with petrochemical arm as well, and we're looking and we're welcoming a larger partnership within that petrochemical side of the business. So this is actually one of the important partnerships that we're looking at. So we want to expand that petrochemical side. Also in Kuwait, we inaugurated our new refinery in Zor. It's 615,000 barrels a day, one of the largest in the world. It's 3 trains. We would like to expand that, go downstream from that into petrochemicals as well in Kuwait. So to build out on that petrochemical block, we're looking for more partnerships. We're counting on the existing excellent partnership that we have through Kuwait to leverage that into international partnerships or even regional and domestic ones to help grow out that petrochemical part. So we're looking at partnerships from that end, so whether it's cross GCC here in Oman, domestically in Kuwait through Azor, and also our expansions in other parts of the world. For example, we partnered with Sabah and SK in Petrochemicals in South Korea. We're looking at other types of partnerships, specifically, and again, I keep going back to the point, we should be doing more as GCC, national oil companies working together in expansions in other parts of the world. One last partnership also that we've gone through, and that's the expansion of the Kuwait partnership. It was domestic to begin with, and then through the vision of the partners and the Kuwaiti private sector, we've pushed it internationally, so it now has crackers in Alberta and a facility in Texas. So it's really a fantastic partnership that we have expanding internationally.
Shaikh Nawaf, so the question is the Gulf has been relying heavily on Western technologies. Is there a plan to localize such technologies in Kuwait? I'm assuming it's about the energy sector.
Yes. I think the technologies that we're relying on, not necessarily Western technologies, I think they're international technologies. And I think it's very important to recognize that we look for expertise wherever it may come from, whether it's locally sourced, regionally, or internationally, or anywhere in the world. But to do that, you need to have the nascent investments. And to that end, we looked at, for example, when I took this position at KPC, we were set to build out a research and development facility, especially focusing on upstream, potentially expanding it then to the downstream facilities, but an R&D facility 100% built by us. And I looked at that, and I took my red pen and drew a line right through that and said, no, we're not going to do this independently. We're going to do, if we do this, we will do this as a joint venture, as a partnership. So we have now, we're now set to build out R&D facilities in Kuwait as partnerships with the companies with which we work, have that technology developed in Kuwait. But we recognize that all of that, anywhere you look at, take a look at any research facility anywhere in the Gulf or around the world, it's never going to be staffed with the citizens of one country. It is an international business, and it requires expertise from around the world. And that's why we want to build this as an international R&D program and not just a homegrown domestic one. So the question, I think, is, yes, we will continue to rely on technologies worldwide. They may be developed regionally or domestically in Kuwait, but they'll rely on expertise that comes from everywhere around the world.
Another question on technology. Do you believe AI is a tool to be used for streamlining production and mitigating environmental effects? And has KPC implemented any form of AI or plans to?
Absolutely, yes. We've implemented, started off just a very simple tool that was used in our shipping company. We have a tanker company, and sometimes we try out some of these smaller things in some of our smaller companies just to see how they work. They rolled out a digital HR employee and found that it's an AI tool, and found that this digital AI employee was fantastic. Employees liked interacting. Usually it's always the worst.
They weren't scared?
People always have an issue with interacting with HR. I don't know why, but...
You don't know why?
I think there's always something to be said for everybody having to do a tour through through HR, just to understand what it takes to lead people and take them through telling employees what they can and can't do. But by the same token, we rolled this digital employee out, and that digital employee got great rave reviews from the rest of the employee base in terms of speed of response, clarity, and the emotional response. So that's on a sort of interactive basis. But for the actual business itself, the rest of the business itself, we are rolling that out, being careful how we do so. But we found on refining, for example, it's done a lot in terms of normal things like predictive maintenance and looking at catalyst change out and use outs. Those are important. On the upstream side, if you talk to a geologist, they'll tell you that a seismic interpretation, where you take, when you shoot seismic, you're trying to figure out whether there's oil or gas underneath. They call it an art more than a science. Maybe it helps justify their continued existence, but if you roll it out into AI, those numbers will be crunched much faster than any one person can do, but they can't replace a person and a person's experience. And this is where, for example, this is, I may be saying a little bit too much here, but in major gas field in Egypt, I remember Claudio Descalzi, the CEO of ENI, called me when I was at our international upstream subsidiary at KUFPEC. And he said, look, I've got this potential field. It could be nothing. I want to drill it. I'd like a partner to help drill this. Can you join us? And we looked at it. I gave it to my G&G team. They looked at it. They said, look, it's high risk, but Nawaf, do it. It's worth it. Definitely worth it. And I went to KPC at the time, the CEO at the time, and I said, look, I want to do this. And their answer was no. Not the right time. Don't do it. It's too risky. Our geologist said, we see it. I can't pinpoint exactly, but we see it. At the same time, ENI pitched it to one of the super major international oil companies. And their G&G team came back to their CEO and said, there's nothing there. This is a fool's errand. You'll be, the quotation was, you're fishing in a swimming pool. There are no fish there. There's nothing there. And they passed up on it. I wanted to go in. Our team wanted me to go in, but we had other reasons why we couldn't. Sure enough, ENI drills it solo, discovers the massive Zohr field. And I remember calling up Claudio and saying, congratulations, my heart's aching. I wanted to be in this thing, but I couldn't. The CEO of the IOC at the time, the other IOC that passed up on it, he and I had a discussion about it, and I said, yeah, I heard you passed up on it. This was the reason I couldn't do it. What was yours? And he said, our team didn't see it. And I asked him what happened afterwards. And he said, well, I fired my team and brought a new team in. But the point is, you can bring in AI to do all of that, but it'll spit out something at you. But if it's not the personal look and feel and understanding, and the geologists will tell you it's not, when you look at all of this, you've got to smell it. You've got to smell the data to see whether you're confident enough to drill a well, $100 million well. And AI can't yet smell.
Not yet.
Not yet. Once they do that, then it becomes a more interesting program.
Shaikh Nawaf, I can't but ask you, given everything that's happening in our region, whether it's the war in Gaza, in Lebanon, the Red Sea disruptions, how does KPC navigate or hedge these challenges?
Unfortunately, this is a region that hasn't had a quiet time, at least any time in our lifetimes. And it's, whether you go back to obviously the 90s with the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, we go to the 80s, the Iran-Iraq war, go into the 70s, 60s, so on and so forth. You're always in a state of turbulence within this region. So we navigate it. We do that by making the investments that we have to make to maintain production capacity. That's always important. Remember when Iraq invaded Kuwait, I think our production was around 1.8 million, I think, at the time. The world was able to, and GCC especially, was able to replace that production into the market very quickly. And then with sanctions on Iraq, it was also able to replace the Iraqi production that was taken off the market. That's because we in the GCC all invest in spare capacity. So it's important, and that's a major mitigation against what's going on. On the security side of things, we deal with things as and when they come. For example, in the 1980s, I mentioned the Iran-Iraq War, if you remember, our shipping was targeted. And we were put in a position where we were almost unable to export oil, especially in the late 1980s. So we brought in international protection for our shipping, and were able to take it out. In 2003, with the Iraq War, we used our tanker fleet. I mentioned our tanker company. We maintain a tanker fleet more for strategic reasons than for commercial ones, because it doesn't really make that much money, but it comes in, its value is immeasurable. For example, in 2003, when international shipping was reluctant to come up the Gulf, especially that far up into the Gulf, north into Kuwait, or that the insurance rates went sky high, we were able to use our shipping fleet to do ship-to-ship transfers, shuttle essentially, out into outside the Strait of Hormuz, to do ship-to-ship transfers and move our hydrocarbons out of the Gulf. So you maintain a strategic response capability within our businesses. Obviously, the attack on Aramco at Bgig, you remember, it happened just before a weekend. I think it was the first weekend that His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz was oil minister. And by Monday morning, when the markets reopened, there wasn't much of a reaction, because Aramco, for example, had invested in the capability to replace production rather quickly. And we and the rest of the Gulf had said, even if it takes Aramco a little bit of time, we have our capacity to bring that oil onto markets, so that the markets internationally will not suffer. So it's that type of ability. And one final point. The GCC has an agreement that any country that is unable to export oil essentially will be picked up. That production will be picked up by another country and then produced on that behalf, and then you do a swap afterwards. And we use that. We use that in multiple occasions, and it's part of the GCC's response to all of these threats.
Does the emergence of new trade routes help?
The emergence of new trade routes certainly helps, and that's actually why the Duqm refinery here in Oman is especially strategic, because it sits right in the middle of one of the most important trade routes in the world. You can't get from, if you're getting from around Africa, or even from the Red Sea, going to India or further on into Asia, you're going to pass right by here. And that's why we are proud of this investment to be a merchant facility, essentially, to be able to trade the products coming out of the refinery into the international system. The trade routes continue to change. We had, for the longest time, been selling crude, for example, into the US, into Europe. We're actually not selling any crude into the US or Europe anymore. All of our crude is going to the east, and that's because that's the highest netback that we get off the barrel of crude. We are selling product into Europe, and in fact, when Europe was going through a crisis because of the cutoff of Russian gas into Europe, facing a very cold winter, we were able to move massive amounts of diesel, sort of a wall of middle distillates, moving towards Europe to alleviate that supply constraint. We're now I think the second largest supplier of jet fuel into Europe, and it's been all part of the investment that we made in Kuwait in the Zohr refinery, and the ability to capture opportunities when they arise.
I want to take just a few questions before we wrap up our session. So first one is, given the finite nature of gas, which is used mostly by the energy and petrochem sector, which of the sectors is expected to move away from gas first and why?
Okay. Obviously, using gas to create electricity sometimes is not the most efficient use of that hydrocarbon. Just like, for example, why am I using oil, for example, to move a heavy piece of equipment from point A to point B, where instead I can use that hydrocarbon to create something more lasting, plastics and whatnot. So looking at gas into petrochemicals will always be there. That's something that we are betting on and continuing to invest in. The ability to move away from power generation, I think, is one of the challenges that we have. Certainly the solar panels of today are much more efficient than the solar panels of yesterday, especially here in the Gulf with the high amounts of dust. It used to be that the minute you cleaned a solar panel in the Gulf, the following day, just because of the natural dust in the air, the efficiency would drop by 50%. So we now there are new panels that have been rolled out where the efficiency is much better. It lasts longer. It's easier to clean. So I think, if anything, we might move away from gas-powered electric generation. But certainly, we're trying to move away from oil being used for power generation. We have stopped using oil in Kuwait years ago by building out more gas-powered plants, but also using fuel oil. We're trying to reduce then ultimately the fuel oil that we're using and relying more on gas and then ultimately more on solar.
Second question is Kuwait looking at a crude to chemicals program?
Excuse me?
Is Kuwait looking at a crude
to chemicals program?
Chemicals program, yeah.
Not immediately. We are looking at, obviously, crudes through naphtha, for example, to chemicals. And that's what we're talking about in Zor, expansion in Zor. But that's part of what we're looking at overall.
Also, so back to the topic of technologies and decarbonization. What technologies do you expect will be key in bringing down, where is it? Okay, down from the 5 kilograms per barrel carbon intensity to zero?
Yeah. The technology, again, I said that CCUS, the ability to handle carbon through the system, recapture it, recycle it into the field. I think that's a major one. A second one, strangely enough, we looked at how much carbon we need to inject into our fields just as we roll out the process. And the idea was to capture carbon at our refineries, 3 refineries in Kuwait. They don't emit enough carbon. We need more carbon. So it's a nice problem to have. And I think the expansion then will be that we will start to capture carbon from the power plants in Kuwait. It's easier to capture that. And so I think capturing enough carbon within the system, I think is also important. I talked about solar. That's really important. And building the technology to make it more efficient. We anticipate solar will eat up, as I said, about 45% of our carbon emissions will be eaten up by CCUS, about 25 or so by solar. We anticipate efficiency gains that will eat up another 12%. Moving further down to afforestation, and my colleagues and I were out planting mangroves in Kuwait. They grow very well. I know they do in Oman as well. All of those things put together will get us down to zero on a Scope 1 and Scope 2 basis. I think the challenge then will be, how does the world reduce the Scope 3 emissions, which are the ones...
One of the questions as well.
How do we reduce the Scope 3 emissions? And that's where the partnerships, I think, humanity has to come together to come up with these solutions. Obviously, companies, and one of the international companies working here in Oman is investing quite a bit, almost betting the company, essentially, on the ability to build out direct air capture that would take carbon out of the atmosphere, isolate, take essentially air, isolate the CO2 out of it. Not yet commercially viable, but a lot of investment going into that will help make that. Building these types of investments out into the future will really take us down to the net zero targets that we're getting towards.
Any closing remarks?
I think this type of a discussion here at GPCA, by bringing in, and I think the point made yesterday is, the petrochemical industry can't look at things by itself. It has to look at the upstream business, how to partner with the upstream business. It was one of the points brought out yesterday's opening, and I really want to double down on that. Bringing in the upstream and the chemicals together to find solutions on decarbonization and on meeting additional demand over the next few generations is really important.
Thank you so much.
A pleasure. Thank you.